It's a great pleasure to welcome the return of author, screenwriter Chris Matheson. Chris, how the hell are you?
Excellent. How are you, man?
That's a good answer. Yeah, excellent too, of course. Lots to talk about. You've got a new book out. Bill and Ted 3 actually happened. We've spoke about this a number of times on the podcast when you've been on, and there was always ideas, there was always a script, the actors were willing, but with Hollywood, and I'm surprised any movies get made at all, to be honest, given what goes into it.
It seems miraculous.
Yeah. But it's happened. It's coming out, so we'll definitely get onto that for sure. I suppose. I mean, the context and the sort of backdrop, rather, of our conversation is the pandemic and various restrictions on our movements and social lives. And I'm just wondering, how does that affect a writer, someone like yourself? So, I mean, people may be forgiven for people for thinking maybe that's ideal. That's more time at home to get your thoughts out. There's fewer social engagements to distract you. Has this aided your writing at all?
I mean, that's not wrong. There's truth. There is certainly truth to that. There's not much to do. There's not really anywhere to go. And so I probably do have more time to just sort of think and write. And I think there's truth to that.
I think it's made me lazier, I think I like having a gun to my head and being told you have 2 hours to get something done. That really motivates me. If I've got all day, I don't tend to get dressed. Yeah. Getting dressed is a hurdle.
Yeah, there's that part of it too. I mean, I definitely sometimes reach the end of the day and stroke my chin and think, what did I get done today?
Well, you've covered a multitude of religions and gods in your books over the last few years. We've covered the Quran, we've covered Christianity, Scientology, got a kicking as well, and now you're focusing your attentions on the Buddha and the new book's The Buddha Story. Now, I suppose one might ask, what is your fascination with scripture? What is it about religious ideology that you feel you can mine for comedy in that way?
Well, to me, it's kind of the ultimate found comedy because there are these stories of absolute truth. I mean, we're supposed to accept them as being the absolute truth about things. And they're all of them that I've read so far are just ultimately kind of laughable and ridiculous and just really fraudulent. And just ugly and dumb and mean-spirited. So I think they're, and like many comedy writers, I like a lot of kinds of comedy, but I do like satire. And satire is really contingent upon having something worthy of satirizing, something that is big enough, powerful enough, inflated enough, let's say, that it makes it worth the time and the effort to make fun of it. And religion certainly fills that bill.
For sure. So Buddhism, in a way, it's not a religion I'm overtly familiar with. I tend to focus on the troubled causes myself. So I think, Buddhism so far has given me a peaceful life. It's not really well subscribed to in the UK, especially. And I was just wondering what sort of experience you had with that religion before. Is this something you decided you'd look into purely for writing about it? Or was you inspired by the religion itself to start writing this book?
I haven't had all that many negative interactions with any religion. You know what I mean? I didn't grow up oppressed by Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Buddhism. Really none of them. I grew up in I guess you'd say, sort of a Christian country in a way. So there was that. With regard to Buddhism, I'd interacted with a few American Buddhists over the years. And I found them insufferable. I thought they were smug, and like somehow they were cool because they were Buddhists and they were onto something, cool. And So I finished with the whole Yahweh project, and I was done with that character. I would have happily followed him, kept following him if he appeared in more books, but he doesn't appear in any more major books, so I couldn't really track him anymore. So that led me to look into Buddhism a little bit, because I felt like it had gotten kind of a pass, like it was seen as the one you could be smart and you could be hip and you could still be a Buddhist. And so I didn't know much about it at all, other than I had found the adherents of the Western adherents, specifically the American adherents, insufferable. And then I started reading, and I thought very quickly, because I just sit and I bought a bunch of books, because you can't just read one book in Buddhism, because it's not the Bible. They don't have that. It's a bunch of books. So I had to read dozens. I mean, ultimately, probably 100. But I sit and I have a red pen that I use to mark up these religious books. Like when I hit something that I think is funny, I just sort of mark it.
That's a lot of red.
It's a lot of red, yeah. In like the Old Testament, that's red, yeah. And very quickly, I started seeing things that I thought were absurd in his story, their telling of his story, and then also in the belief system. And I thought, well, yeah, I want to do this. This is worth doing.
So, I mean, if we're talking about Buddhism in the States, it strikes me as sort of very wishy-washy, spiritual, bourgeois type of hippie kind of, have your religion and eat it kind of thing, where you're not really having to go to church and do all the mundane, boring things one might associate with religion, but you get to claim a certain sort of spirituality. Is this, the ballpark of the kind of people you'd encounter?
I think that's sort of right. Yeah, it's sort of in the almost like self-improvement, and so it's a way to use these beliefs to enhance your performance in life or something like that. Yeah, I think that's sort of right.
In regards to your writing on Yahweh, I mean, one of the things that really shone through was his certain, neuroses, his characteristics. He was very petty, vindictive, very thin-skinned. And if you was to describe the Buddha to somebody who hadn't heard of him before or wasn't familiar with any of the core text, what kind of things would you say would define him the most?
I would say what I was struck by is the breathtaking arrogance of this character. I don't believe I've ever encountered a human being anywhere on the page, in real life, certainly on the page, in any of the other religions, with the jaw-dropping arrogance of this man. He is perfect by his own description. A lot of Buddhism hinges on freeing yourself from your ego, right? Because your ego is kind of a trap. But he's perfect. He's called Tathagata. He instructs his followers to call him Tathagata. Tathagata means perfect one. And he doesn't say that, and he will make it clear, this is not my ego talking. This is simply the truth. I am perfect. And he is described as perfect in his appearance, perfect in his body, perfect in his voice, perfect in his brain, perfect in his behavior throughout his entire life and in every other life that he inhabits. And there's a bunch of them, because he has a bunch of past lives that we hear about. So it's shocking, really, like the cracks in the armor that you get with Yahweh, and you get a bunch of them, because he's a mess. That dude's mess. He is so weirdly self-punishing and self-hating, and I found that very interesting about him. Not this guy. This guy causes a lot of pain. He doesn't seem to be in pain.
I mean, so how do you mentally prepare yourself to spend so much time with a character like that? I mean, especially if you're saying it's multiple volumes, it's not just, the Quran or the New Testament or whatever, it's lots of volumes, and there's this absolute ego maniac that's central to it. I mean, I have to praise your perseverance for a start. Well, it's the deflation that I was talking about. I think that's one of the jobs of a comedy writer. I think there's the old saying about writing comedy is afflict the comfortable, and if possible, comfort the afflicted. I haven't been so good at comforting the afflicted. I don't really know how to do that, but afflict the comfortable.
deflated. That seemed worth doing to me. And I thought it was funny. I mean, it really wasn't like onerous at all. I thought he was funny. To me, he was another, I just felt like I'd bumped into, you asked, why am I drawn to this stuff? And as a comedy writer, it's just stuff you find laying on the ground. And he's tremendously funny. He's ridiculous. His arrogance is ridiculous. He's a fool. He's a fool. And all comedy writers like to write pompous fools. Pompous fools are great for comedy. So I thought he was a lot of fun to write, actually. And also, by the way, it probably just has to go without saying, and this has occurred to me. I mean, I'm trying to write these characters from the inside, right? I have to. That's the only way I can make them make sense to me. That's the only way I can get any traction going. And so I just keep writing these insufferable assholes from the inside. So you can infer what you wish from that, I think.
Okay, well, I suppose that something that occurs to me as well with you delving into this in a satirical way and mining it for comedies rather. These are scriptures and figures and mythological deities that are held in high regard, shall we say, with a lot of people. So for you, it's comedy. To other people, they may consider it blasphemous. And I was just wondering, out of all the things you've touched on, be it Scientology, Mormonism, Christianity, Islam, and now Buddhism, is there anything that's for you you've noticed has provided a certain amount of pushback where other religions haven't, or have you managed to just basically get away with it so far?
Not really very present in the world, you know. I don't do social media. I think if I did, I would have gotten some. That's part of why I don't do it. I didn't really want to get lambasted with people telling me how I was going to burn in hell forever. I know they think that. I mean, obviously they think. I haven't really got, my wife she'll just roll her eyes and just say, you're going to get you're going to get yourself assassinated by Buddhist monks. And I just think, well, that would be funny.
That would be a funny death. Yeah, that would be. I mean, don't get me wrong, tragic, but funny.
But funny. It's good black comedy.
We would write songs about you. Yeah, well, I mean, the social media thing's really interesting to me, and I think you're a very wise man not to indulge in that sort of thing, and it has got considerably worse over the years, the vindictiveness, the abuse, the vitriol, that kind of thing. And I was wondering, as a matter of fact, since I've seen you promoting the new Bill and Ted movie, and I was wondering, is there any pressure from the studio to have a social media presence in terms of for marketing purposes?
I mean, not for me. My co-writer, Ed Solomon, does quite a lot. Alex Winter, who plays Bill, does quite a lot. So there are people who do that. Nobody's ever said a word to me. They've asked me to participate in certain interviews, and I happily do that. But honestly, I don't think they'd care if I didn't. I don't think it would make one bit of difference to their selling of the movie.
Well, one huge theme that runs through these religions, and you pick up on it beautifully in your writing, is this absolute disdain for the female form or female biology or just females in general, really. I remember chuckling along to your writing on the First Testament, how God was so forgetful of females because they basically weren't named in the book for a start. It was kind of inconsequential. And there seems to be this strange obsession with the natural way of birth, and we see this in Christianity with the virgin birth, and Buddha himself claims to have been born from the side of his mother. So what do you think explains this absolute revulsion at basic female biology that runs through these scriptures?
Huge question, isn't it? That's a big one. Well, there's a deep fear of female sexuality, I think. There's a deep terror regarding female sexuality. There's a deep desire to control the narrative, tell the story from a certain point of view, all of these stories couldn't be more male-centric. Every one of them. There's no room. I guess you'd say the New Testament a little bit, because Mary kind of plays a role, but does Mary even speak? I don't know. Do you know? I don't believe she
I don't think so.
I don't think she ever speaks. She just reacts to these men. It seems to be something in men, and a certain kind of men who want to control things completely. They seem to. The female narrative is just a complicated one. It's different. I've been married now for 33 years.
Oh, congratulations.
And thank you very much. And I have a 26-year-old daughter. And I would say when I was young, I didn't really know anything about women. I mean, I really knew nothing about women. I didn't have a good relationship with my mother, and I didn't really have a relationship to speak of with my sisters, and I didn't have a grandmother, and I didn't have, or I did, but I didn't have a relationship, and I didn't have any aunts. I just didn't have anything. And so I just didn't understand women, and I didn't understand their. It's hard, I think, to be a woman. I think it's very difficult, and I think men have made it harder for them. And men want to take over, and men want to dominate the story. It just seems to be in us. And men want to push women out of the way. And men, I think, are historically very frightened of women. And I think female sexuality is both riveting and terrifying to many men. And I think you see that manifested again and again and again in these books. Push them out of the way, demonize them. I mean, if you think about it in the Bible, I think it's a pretty reasonable interpretation that everything bad that ever happens in human life, Eve's responsible for. I mean, it's her. Adam presumably would have gone along. Adam would have followed the line. God says, don't do this. Adam wouldn't have done it. He's a weakling, but he would have gone along with it. But Eve almost instantly defies what she's been told. And everything bad that happens, that's the sin. That's the sin. She's responsible for it from the very start. And the Buddha is very, very clear that women are dangerous. Women are... they're very dangerous to men. He says at one point, you would be smarter to put your penis into a hot fire than into a woman, because the hot fire will burn your penis off, but the woman will destroy your entire existence.
Wow, that's heavy.
Yeah, it's heavy. Also, the Buddha thinks that the goal of this whole thing is to not exist. That's the goal. That's the end point. The point is life is bad. Life is suffering. Life is pain. What you really want, the only goal that's worthwhile, is non-existence, is to go extinct. Therefore, every time you bring a child into the world, you've done something. You've made a big mistake. Every time you're seduced by a woman, every time, because women, they seem to be an lesser sort of spirit. They want to have children, so they will seduce a man so that they can get pregnant. Every time they do that, they perpetuate the cycle.
Yeah, I mean, the entire thing really reeks of insecure men who want to control women and have the monopoly on their movements, their independence, their sexuality, like you say. And I suppose, I mean, it's not even like we're talking about this in the past sense. This still occurs in 2020 in various places across the world. And I suppose nothing's more of a threat to religious ideology than an emancipated woman, and we see this time and time again. And it just goes to show really that these scriptures are all, I mean, when you get down to it, they're not divinely revealed, they're not, special. They're authored by semi-literate men thousands of years ago who were just trying to either understand the world by invoking supernatural explanations and at the same time invoke a little bit of control over their own interest, it seems to me.
I couldn't agree with that assessment more, Stephen. I think that's about right. When you look at them a certain way, and I was never indoctrinated into any of them, so I didn't have a starting point of like, wow, I have to free my brain from reading it a certain way. I had a degree of objectivity and looked at that way. It just couldn't be more obvious that there's an agenda to all of them. They're all about kind of power and control and status and the ego at the center. The frightened, they're all like the Wizard of Oz. They're all the frightened little man behind the curtain. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It's always about the little man behind the curtain, though. All of them. Who the man behind the curtain in the Old Testament is, we don't know exactly. It's a bunch of them. It's not one. It's a number of them. Solomon is certainly one of them, but we don't know who all of them are. In the New Testament, we start to know who they are. It's Paul and it's Matthew and it's Mark and then of course the Quran. It's Muhammad, and he really wants to hide. He really wants to make it seem like it's not him, as does Joseph Smith. They really want to hide. They really want to hide behind the curtain and make you not see them, as does the Buddha. He wants you to think it's not about him, but it's all about him. They always are. And when you look at it that way, they look really different.
Well, I mean, we've noticed similar themes in religions, but certainly the desire for control, the misogyny, the way of trying to explain natural phenomena with supernatural explanations, but religions are different in many ways too, and that does manifest differently, and that's one of the reasons you can recognise certain adherents of certain religions from others, I suppose, in their behaviour, sometimes dress, the way of worship, things like that. And I suppose, given you've done a deep dive on many of the great world religions over the years, if you, gun to your head, had to accept one of them, what would be the path of least resistance, do you think? What would be the one that would give you the easier life?
Wow. Well, they're all fundamentally misguided in terms of their life advice. If you just look at them, let's say, as philosophies, here's how to live, human beings. They're all wrong. They're all terrible, as far as I can tell. They're all absolutely terrible as advice. The one that I think has the most beauty to it, because it has the most pain, is Christianity, because it's steeped in pain and death and shame. And the art that emerges from it, is utterly magnificent, incredibly beautiful. Some of the books in the Bible are, in fact, really, really beautiful. I mean, if I was going to do it, I would just say, you know what? I'm an Ecclesiastian. If that's what I'm an Ecclesiastian, I would just follow Ecclesiastes, which I think is legit beautiful. I think it's great. It contradicts everything else in the book pretty much, but I think it's really, really beautiful. But I guess if I had to say, I used to have this weird kind of like, I found there's something alluring about Catholicism because it's just so, this is all those rituals and it's so thick with bizarro meanings and it's just all that shame and blood and, there's something really dramatic about it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the misfortune of attending a few Catholic weddings, and it's around about the halfway mark. You kind of wonder to yourself, is Jesus getting married today? Or because it's just full on Jesus. These you've got this beautiful bride and the groom. It's their big day, and it's still all about our Lord and Savior. Yeah.
Well, so let me ask you, what would you pick if you had to pick one?
I'll ask the fucking questions here, Chris. I've not thought about it. I mean, I think I see a little bit of my experience in yours in the sense that I'd never been religious. It never really stuck. I suppose thanks to the British schooling system, I had a sort of culturally Christian upbringing, but I think I was too lazy to pay attention to any of it. None of the books had pictures in, which is always a big downside. I don't know. I mean, Scientology is very Hollywood, isn't it? It's got a little bit of glamour to it, maybe.
Okay,
So
you'd be a Scientologist.
I think
Awesome.
so. Yeah. So, I mean, Bill and Ted 3 is coming out. It's called Bill and Ted Face the Music. And like I said, we've spoke about it before, and it's always been something you've had ideas for and a script, and it's just a case of getting the funding, right place, right time. And it's here, it's happening, it's being released this month. And I'm just wondering, first of all, how's the pandemic affected this? It might seem somewhat of a risky move to put it out now, given a lot of the films over the summer have been delayed.
Well, in the U.S., it's going to be in a few theaters, but most movie theaters are closed. It's in most states, so it's mainly going to be, video on demand. I think in the UK, it's actually going to open in movie theaters. So, what is the wisdom of that? I don't know. I guess it just depends on how bad the pandemic is in Britain at this point. Are you guys that safe? You guys to go to movie theaters? Do you have to have every other seat or something?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to the theatre at the end of this month for the first time, the movie theatre. Wow. And it will be socially distanced. There will be spaces in between people, so obviously the footfall is going to be a lot lower in that sense, and we'll see how it goes. I don't think the numbers are coming down in the UK quite rapidly. We're having spikes here and there regionally, so regional areas are going into lockdown and things like that, but it seems to be relaxing quite a bit. But video on demand now seems to me doesn't have the stigma or the end result it used to. In the 90s and maybe the early 2000s, the idea of a film not going to the theatre would feel almost like a failure. And now people are crying out for, you look at some of the things Netflix are putting out on demand, winning awards, and, these huge cinematic things like The Irishman and things like that. So it's not, it'll find its audience, and more eyes will probably get on it from an on-demand perspective anyway. I love the theatre, I love the movie theatre, any excuse to go there. Every time it's my birthday, that's all I ever want to do, let's go and see a film. So I would miss it, but are we looking at perhaps the end of the movie theatre in the traditional sense?
Possibly. There are these gigantic movies. A movie like Bill and Ted, it's going to be just fine to watch in your home. Most people have decent sized screens, and it's not a gigantic special effects laden movie. It's mainly a character movie, and it's a comedy, so it's pretty much fine. Something like, are you going to see Tenet? Is that what you're going to see at the end?
That's what I didn't want to mention that I was seeing other movies while you was here, but yeah, Tenet.
Oh, dude, you got to go see that. Hell, I'd go to the theater to see that one, but
sure.
It's not opening in theaters here. You guys get to see it before we do.
Yeah,
it's not opening in the U.S.
That's a strange. Are we the guinea pigs? Do you think? Let's see what happens to the Brits.
I think it's opening all around Europe. I think it's opening all over the place. It's just that we've botched it so badly here that it's not safe to open it here.
I'm assuming you guys are still allowed to fly internally. Is that correct?
Probably.
Right.
I haven't, because...
What's the point?
Why? There hasn't been a necessity, and I haven't really felt inclined to do so. But yeah, no, people are definitely flying. With regard to the end of movie theaters, I kind of feel like as long as there's Marvel movies and Star Wars movies and a movie like Tenet, most people, including myself, I think, are going to prefer to see something like that or a James Bond movie on a big screen. And I would think that would continue. It would be such a big part of my childhood and really my whole life. It would be very weird if that just went away.
I agree. So how are we treating the time gap between the movies? Because the first two films, there wasn't a huge amount of time in between them. This third one, so much has happened in the real world. So much must have happened in these characters' lives. They've aged considerably. Are we dealing with that in the film?
Yeah, I would say that's in many ways the subject of the
Oh, great.
29 years have passed, and we're not steering away from that at all. They're not boys anymore. They're not teenage boys. They're 50 years old, and they've been married for 29 years. They've raised
Not to each other, though.
Not to each other. No, some people would probably find that interesting. It probably would be interesting, but no, not to each other. To the princesses, to the English princesses, who they were their girlfriends from the first movie on, and they've failed. I mean, it didn't what they thought was going to happen, them saving the world, what they were told was going to happen. It hasn't happened, and so now they're 50 years old, and they're dealing with the reality of it didn't work out, and then they're told by another visitor from the future, you've got to do it now, like that song that we need to save the universe. You now, like, time's up. You've got 75 minutes. You've got to do it right now. So so that's basically the starting point of the movie.
So as a co-writer on the picture, how much time, if any, would you spend on the set, if at all? Are you the kind of writer who, like, this is the screenplay, this is done, you've done your bit, and then you see what comes out the other end? Or are you someone who's quite hands-on, who wants to be there at the same time?
It's kind of a mix. They filmed for, I believe, 7 weeks, and I was there for 2.5 weeks of the 7 weeks. So I mean, I was there for a good, healthy chunk of it, but not the whole thing, because I didn't really want to be there the whole time and just camp out there. But it was fun. It was fun to be there. The first one, I was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I had nothing to do, I was like 27 years old, and I just went and stayed the whole time. Both Ed and I did. The second one, my wife and I had our first child, and I was hardly on the set of Bogus Journey at all. I mean, I remember just being there maybe, and it filmed in LA, and I lived in LA at the time, so I could have been there, but I really wasn't at all. And then this one was kind of half, it was mixed.
This is why I love having you on, Chris. I get to talk about movies as well. Normally it's just philosophy and religion, which is great, but movies are really my passion. So whenever I get somebody who's involved in the business, I just want to mine your brain. So, I mean, I suppose, what was it like seeing Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves step back into them characters? It must have been strange for them, given how much they've done since, and not only coming back to characters that they played so long ago, but they're almost different people in a way, because you said it was 29 years, I think you said. So what was it like watching them trying to feel their way back into those characters that everyone knows and loves? It
was fascinating. When we worked on this for a long time before we got it made. We started, Ed and I had our first conversation with Alex and Keanu, like, are you guys interested in pursuing this, in 2008? And we didn't get it made until 2019. So there were a lot of years of us just kind of working on the script, and a lot of years of us doing nothing, but definitely us working with the guys over the years. And Ed and I we were just always hoping we'd get a glimpse. Like somehow at one of our meetings with them, that Alex and Keanu would break into Bill and Ted. We were a little fanboy, we just wanted them to do Bill and they just never would. They never would. They were very, very disciplined. They'd give us notes, but they just wouldn't do Bill and Ted. And it wasn't until about, maybe a month or two before filming, we had a big, big rehearsal over at the read-through, not a rehearsal. We had a script read-through, like a 9-hour thing at Dean Paraso's house. He's the director, where we just went through it page by page by page by page, and the guys were giving us extremely granular notes, I would say, which was good. We liked all their notes. They're smart guys. And they started doing it a little bit, and it was really, really fantastic. It was really exciting. And they were just ready, We got to day one on the set, and they didn't film the first day. Interestingly, the first day was their daughter's. But the second day they filmed, and they just were ready. It was fascinating. They were just ready to do it again. Like, they'd found a way internally to re-access Bill and Ted, but their version of Bill and Ted had grown up. Their version of Bill and Ted was not, they weren't just going back and playing. I hope people like that about the movie. I think it's an interesting part of the movie. They are Bill and Ted. I mean, they're very recognizably Bill and Ted, but they're not Bill and Ted like a couple of 50-year-old men acting like teenagers. They've grown up, and they have inner lives and disappointments and pains, and it was really interesting to watch. It was great.
Gosh, I can't believe I didn't pick up on something earlier when you mentioned Marvel movies and how they'd obviously keep cinema alive. And I don't know if you're aware, I don't know how many of the Marvel films you've seen, but Bill and Ted was actually referenced in the latest Avengers Endgame movie, in terms of discussing the rules of time travel and what is and isn't logically consistent. And Bill and Ted was referenced as an example. And I suppose that makes me wonder, did you ever impose any sort of restrictions or rules or theories of how time travel would function? Are there do's and don'ts? Or is it a case of, if it serves the narrative and it's funny, it works?
Yeah, it's more the latter.
Right.
We have been asked that, like somehow, what is your guys' take on time travel? Do you have? And it's not much, it's really not much. We just go for the comedy and the character stuff, and then we just sort of patch it together with like chewing gum and wire and try and get it to hold up. I guess to the degree that there was, a theory, and there isn't, because we never really talked about it, but I suppose what informs it a little bit is that we wanted to play with it. It is a comedy. We wanted to, as I've told you before, we were both very, 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 very hugely inspired by Python. And Python they did a lot that was great, but they would do really, really smart things in a really, really silly way. That's one of the things that characterizes them. They're really smart guys, but they're very silly, very, very playful. And so we wanted to play with time travel. So something like in the first movie, outside the police station, where they're like, figure out this way that somehow they've already set things up for themselves that they can now take advantage of. They just have to do it after they pass the test. Well, it's very weird. It's very counterintuitive, but it kind of makes sense. And it's just a sort of silly, playful way of doing it, and we like stuff like that.
I mean, you mentioned how young you were when you were writing the first film, and I suppose Keanu Reeves was young, very young at the time as well. And I mean, did you ever envision that he'd become this huge action hero that he is now, not only with the Matrix films, but since reinvigorated that aspect of his career with things like John Wick? I mean, can you, from all accounts, I've heard that Keanu Reeves is a very, nice, gentle individual, but he portrays this, virtual killing machine in the John Wick films. Did you ever envision that in his future at all, keeping on the time travel theme?
Specifically the action thing, not specifically that, no. Although him becoming a big star, if somebody told me on the set of Bill and Ted, that guy's going to be a huge star, that would not have surprised me, because he had something different about him. He's really not like anybody. He was not like anybody I'd ever met in 1987. And I think I would say in 2020, I've still never met anybody like Keanu. He's a very unusual guy, and he's got a very deep and strange charisma to him. He's quite a handsome guy, obviously. There's that. And he has a natural physicality to him, which is really interesting. I was like that long meeting at Dean Paraso's house. I was sitting right next to him. We were just sitting next to each other at the table. And he's got this, his physicality is really kind of palpable. It feels really athletic. It's like you're sitting next to a tiger or something. Right? It's really different. So I wouldn't have foreseen the action thing specifically, but him becoming a big star, yeah, I think I bet there were people on the set who were talking about that at the time.
Excellent. Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing that, and I'll make sure I get it in the calendar ASAP for sure. At the cinema too. The only way to really properly watch a movie, especially we've waited so long for it, I think it deserves the cinema treatment if you're going to see it. But I mean, you may have noticed, or maybe you haven't, with being immune from social media, but there's a lot of talk and microscope pointed towards movies nowadays, looking for social commentary, looking for lines that are crossed in certain areas regarding maybe gender, race, things like that. And not only is it with contemporary movies, people are also taking this lens to older movies 70s, 80s onwards. Everything seems fair game, and they're being judged on the standards of today. And a lot of things have been edited to that effect. A lot of scenes are being removed from movies. There's a lot of revisionism going on, people trying to toe the line of a more politically correct narrative. And I was just wondering, looking back at the first two Bill and Ted films, how do you think they fared in terms of how they'd be judged in light of today's standards? And are you concerned about the mob coming for you in terms of misunderstanding something you've written, or taking something the wrong way, or maybe you've crossed the line in a way you hadn't realized you had, that kind of thing? Well, there was a lot there. That was a heavy question.
Yeah, it's a big question. There's several different parts to that. The part of the first movie that we've gotten some blowback on is obviously Bill and Ted. They hug each other and then they separate quickly and they both say fag. And that seemed funny to Ed and I when we were in our mid-20s. We were kind of boys, and we were probably sort of boys who were insecure about our own kind of feelings about other guys, maybe. I don't know. It was a projection of that, I think. If I could time travel back and remove that line, I would. I absolutely would. I don't think it's a good line. I think it's an interesting line in that it reveals something about their inner lives and about their characters. So to that degree, I wouldn't be in favor of somebody, just going in and excising it. But I'm not really aware of that happening. I haven't heard anybody suggest that. And I don't see that happening in American comedy at this point.
Oh, no, I mean, I think it already has happened. There's been a few movies where they have gone back, especially now with films being digital. So I know that Disney...
Re-edited?
Yes, so removing quote-unquote problematic scenes. For instance, there's a few comedies on Netflix right now that featured scenes with characters doing quote-unquote blackface, and Netflix have since gone in and removed them, either them particular episodes or those particular scenes, kind of put them in the memory hole. So it is an issue in terms of the big streaming giants. They are listening to social media pressure and actually taking action and altering someone's art in that sense to make it conform to whatever current political climate we're living in.
Well, here's my point of view on this. I don't think the good jokes go away ever. I think the good jokes tend to come from, I think, making fun of oneself, laughing at oneself when one can do that. That will always be funny. It always has been funny. You guys in England invented that, and you are historically the masters of it. Geoffrey Chaucer, as far as I'm aware, invented it, and you guys have historically been the best at it. And that will never not be funny, and that will always be good. Laughing at let's say, the absurdity and strangeness of existence will always be good. That's always valid. That's always real. That's always going to be good. Laughing, let's say, for lack of a better term, punching up is always good, is always valid. It always has been. It's not always funny. I mean, it's usually not funny because it can just be too like I'm not a fan of Candide, for instance. I don't think it's funny. I think it's amazing. I think it's great that he's like punching up the way he is. I don't even think Gulliver's Travels is very funny, because I think that kind of like, that sort of venom is not very funny, but it's certainly worthy and it's certainly good. So here's what I think is being called into question. Here's what I think is under the microscope, as you said: punching down, laughing down, making fun of groups that have historically been oppressed and laughed at. I think that is being questioned. I don't think there's any loss there. I really don't. I truly don't. I don't think there's any loss. And I think if that's how you've made your living, fuck it. Find another job.
Is there not something to be said to the fact that, in the scene specifically with Bill and Ted where they embrace and then detach and say the word fag, is there not something to say about the fact that it's the two stupidest characters in the movie doing that? In the sense that we're not necessarily laughing at homophobia, we're sort of laughing at their childish ignorance, their sort of stupidity in that regards. I mean, it didn't feel to me like we were celebrating homophobia there. It just felt like we were depicting two idiots being idiots in that moment.
Well, the problem with it, what people have perceived, and I don't think they're wrong, is that Bill and Ted are very benign. Bill and Ted like everyone. Bill and Ted don't judge anyone. If you think about it, from the first moment of the movie to the last moment of the movie, Bill and Ted are very sweet and they're very generous spirited. And they really seem to like everybody, and they don't treat anybody differently from anybody else. And so to have these two guys who seem to be quite tolerant of other human beings suddenly revealing that, at least on some level, they're homophobic. Yeah, that rubs people the wrong way. Okay. And they are. And there's no getting around it. Now, I can justify it because I can say, look, Ed and I had our own issues, and these guys are just really uncomfortable with the kind of love that they feel for each other. And it's not sexual, but they're just not comfortable with how strong. So I can justify it that way. And, that's fine. But I don't think it's a good joke, actually, and I'd be much happier now, would I want someone to go in and excise it? No, I don't. I don't think so. I think it's enough for people to just sort of talk about it. But look, comedy is what I think about. It's what I read. It's what I don't know much about. I don't even know that I know much about comedy, but I have strong feelings about comedy. And there are things that were written 500 years ago that are still very funny. And there are things that are not. And the things that are ugly and ugly is too harsh a word. The things that punch down, the things that mock people who are perceived to be weaker and have less power, they're bad jokes, flat out. They're bad jokes. They're not worthy of defense. They're just not. And you can say it's free speech, and you can say, well, I should be able to say whatever the hell I want. And you know what? You can. Is anybody talking about sending Ricky Gervais to jail? Ricky Gervais, who's hilariously funny, by the way. He's crazy funny, that guy. Is anybody talking about shutting Dave Chappelle down and not letting him speak? No, he says whatever the hell he wants. He's always making jokes about trans people. He loves that. He goes there all the time. What's the sanction? The sanction is some people are like, they don't, you get disapproval. You get some social disapproval. Disney's Disney, Disney going back in and recut. They are so supremely aware of their audience. That they would go back and sort of trim certain things. It's like there's a movie called Song of the South, right? Song of the South. It's like Uncle Remus, right? Zippity doo dah, zippity a, and it's really, really racist. They're really, it's like I think, I haven't seen it in a long, long time, but I think he's kind of a happy old slave. I think. And, what do you do with that? Do you say it can't be seen? No, you don't say it can't be seen. No, not at all. but you've got to contextualize it. And I don't think there's much to defend there. But whatever. In terms of comedy, no, I don't think we're losing a damn thing. In fact, I think it's a good thing overall.
So, I mean, you wouldn't say this sort of, I mean, some people term it cancel culture in the sense that a lot of people, I mean, you mentioned Dave Chappelle and Ricky Gervais there, and I think they walk right up to the line, dangerously close, but remain on the right side. But the problem is that line in the next 5 years will have moved somewhere, and probably they'll be in trouble. But I mean, they're two people who are probably too large to cancel in terms of the audience they command, and they call the shots essentially. People who aren't kind of in that realm do find themselves falling afoul of the online mobs and quote unquote cancel culture. And we live in the video age now where a stand-up comedian would be able to go out and try new material on stage, and if it didn't work, that'd be thrown in the bin and they wouldn't use it again. But now everyone's got a phone, everyone's got Twitter. It's somebody says something quote unquote problematic at a gig and it's trending on Twitter within the 20 minutes of it being said. And I was just wondering, does any of this have any impact on your writing at all? Are you writing with a socially conscious mindset, or are you just trying to focus on what's true and what's funny to you when you write?
I'm trying to write what I think is funny. I'm trying to write what makes me laugh. I'm aware that things are changing, and I'm aware that as a straight white guy, my perspective on things, it has been framed by that, and that there are things that I've probably missed, things that I haven't seen. I'm aware that there are people that I love and care about, and I don't want to make jokes at their expense. And I believe strongly that no good comedy is at risk, Stephen. No good comedy is at risk. I don't think it is. The good comedy comes from self-mockery, mockery of the powerful, and a basic awareness of the absurdity of existence. That's where all the good comedy in the history of the world comes from, and the comedy that comes from laughing at people and mocking people, especially those who've historically been less powerful, is not worth protecting. It's just not. And if people want to do it, they can, and they're not going to go to jail for it. But are they going to get rewarded the same way they did? Nope, they're not.
Okay, so moving back to your writing on religion and the Buddha story specifically, I mean, you've covered, have you set your eyes on something that might come next after this that you think you might delve into? I mean, what's left? I mean, short of starting your own religion, which I probably, I wouldn't put past you at this point, is there anything that's caught your eye?
Of course, I read a little bit about Hinduism, because that's the obvious one, right? In my project to, mock all of the major world religions. But it just didn't seem that funny to me. I mean, I spent a day kind of reading about it, and I thought, yeah, I don't know, man. It just doesn't seem as idiotic. It's polytheistic, for one thing. And polytheism doesn't seem as inherently stupid to me. It's more flexible. There's just more room to it. And it even has more of an explanatory power. There's good gods, there's bad gods. The good God made that happen, the bad, it doesn't seem as idiotic and bullying as monotheism. So it can't be Hinduism. There's New Age stuff. I mean, I certainly could do that. That seems a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel, because it's so dumb. It's so dumb. But maybe my dad was a huge believer in like a bunch of New Age stuff, every New Age thing you can believe in. So to the degree that there's an emotional reason why I'm reacting against ideas of absolute truth, it's my dad. It's absolutely my dad.
So this is I've got it now. This is just one long form version of therapy for you, isn't it?
Yes. That's a long, drawn out version of therapy. Yeah. Yeah, my dad literally made a CD called Reality, capital R, Reality, where he just speaks for like 2 hours straight. And he just lays out, like, here's reality, here's what it is. And I remember listening to it, and I just was like, Dad, I mean, are you just like flat out, you're just saying that's it? Like, that's what like somehow you know? Yep. Yep. So I don't know, or maybe I'll find some way to go back to the most fun one, honestly, is the Bible. Oh, the Bible's so fun. It's so juicy. It's so filled with craziness and crazy characters. And it's just when people say, oh my God, how do you read the Bible? It's so boring. It's like, no, it's not actually. It's really, really fun. Parts are boring, but a lot of it's really, really fun. So there's my long, vague answer.
That's great. Well, Chris, this has flown by as it always does when I chat with you. I really enjoyed it, as always. Is there anything at all you want to say about your book or Bill and Ted or life in general before I let you get back to your afternoon?
Oh, wow. Well, I hope that people get a little bit of, it's been a stressful year, and I hope that Bill and Ted provides 90 minutes of a little bit of pleasure and happiness. That would be nice.
Kevin Smith said it made him cry. I don't know if you heard that. He absolutely adored it.
Yeah, I know. I saw that. We did like a Comic-Con.
Yeah.
With him. And that was nice. It's because 29 years have gone by, there's an emotional quality to it that's different than the first two. And I hope people like that. And that's all.
Excellent, Chris. It's great to speak to you. It's great to see you, and I'll be booking tickets straight away for that. But I'll keep an eye on for whatever you do next, because it's always good fun. Always makes me chuckle, and especially these religions that many of which I'm familiar with. You always come at them from an angle that I hadn't considered before. This first person way of approaching them is just a beautiful way to expose all the hypocrisy of it. It just works wonderfully with religion. So it's good to see you doing that.
Thanks, Stephen. You have to email me and let me know how Tenet is, because I'm not going to be able to see it.
No spoilers, yeah?
No, you can spoil it for me. You can spoil it.
You know what? It's a Christopher Nolan film. I probably won't have any idea what's going on anyway. So yeah,
you'll be like, well, I think this is what happened.
Yeah, the soundtrack was good. The soundtrack was great, but yeah, no idea. Okay, yeah, for sure. I'll let you know.
All right, man.
Take care. Good to catch up. Thank you very much.
You too. Thanks for having me, Steve.
No worries. Speak to you soon.